Well, recently in South Australia, there have been changes to adult adoption laws. Now, that might leave you scratching your head and say, well, what's the purpose of having adult adoption laws anyway? Why do we have them? And what are some of those changes? These happened in recent months, and to help explain what it all means, we have in the studio with us Eva Bailey, a lawyer and partner at the firm Anderson's Solicitors. Eva, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sonya.
What is adult adoption, firstly?
So adoption, as most of your listeners would understand, I expect, is becoming someone's parent when you're not biologically their parent. So adult adoption, as it sounds, is exactly that, adopting someone who is in fact legally an adult.
I'm imagining that that would be a choice kind of thing as opposed to a requirement, because you'd presume at 18 you're in charge of yourself.
Definitely. I think, though, the law did have a process for it before, and now, recently, the changes have allowed people to apply. They apply in the Youth Court of South Australia to make someone their legal parent. In fact, it's the legal step-parent or other foster parent that they want to adopt them who needs to make the application.
So is there a limit on how old you can be adopted? I mean, can a 65-year-old person be adopted by an 85-year-old person, for instance?
Well, I haven't come across that at this point, but no, I haven't seen any limit in the legislation at this stage, just that for this particular set of laws under the Adoption Act, you need to be over the age of 18. There are adoptions of children, of course. That usually involves the Department of Child Protection, whereas adult adoption is a decision that the child, who's legally an adult, is making.
What is it about the application through the youth court? Because everyone we're dealing with presumably are adults at this point.
That's right. I think the youth court has always had the power to deal with adoptions, and I just think the Parliament probably decided that we'll give the power to that court because they deal with adoptions and they can deal with adult adoptions as well. I guess also it's a state court and the Adoption Act is a state act.
Why did we make these changes? What sort of triggered the interest in adult adoptions?
Well, in 2014, 2015, there was a review conducted of the Adoption Act. That was instigated by Jennifer Rankine at the time, who was the Minister for Education and Child Development, and then Susan Close MP followed on from her. They instigated it, and it was looking at a number of changes. It wasn't looking at just adult adoption, but adult adoption has effectively come out of it.
So have there been people complaining that we haven't had the facility for adult adoptions? Because, look, and I'd love to hear from you. I mean, if you're in a position, would you like to access adult adoptions? Maybe you've had been grown up. Maybe you've grown up in a foster home or in a home with step parents, and legally you would love to have that choice. Perhaps if there were biological parents still alive, they didn't give approvals, and you want to see that remedied, or whatever. And what was the circumstances that might lead to someone, perhaps you, wanting to be adopted as an adult? Were there sort of demands or cases that you were aware of that triggered this? I
haven't had inquiries until this law changed and until we put it up on our website to say that under our blog, adults can now be adopted. So I didn't have people complaining to me that it wasn't possible. I did have people inquiring about adoption orders for their children and change of name and things like that. And as you touch on, when you have biological parents around who may not consent to that, that can be a difficulty. With the adult adoption process, the law still requires all biological parents to consent, but there are exceptions to that.
What, at 18, you still have to get your biological parent to consent to an adult adoption?
According to the Act, according to the legislation, you do, but there are exceptions, for example, abandonment and other exceptions like that. And it is a new area that we're just getting our heads around as well. But according to the Act, you still, in theory, need your biological parents' consent. Now, we expect that as we apply for clients who are already making inquiries, I would have thought the special circumstances for the biological parents' consent not to be required will be quite wide, but it's something that we're needing to work through with the court on.
It's coming up to 14 minutes past 2 here on ABC Radio Adelaide. In the studio with me is Eva Bailey. She's a lawyer and partner at the firm Anderson's Solicitors, talking us through some of these changes that now enable adult adoption in South Australia. 1300 222 891 if you've got any questions, or maybe you've got an experience in which this is something that might appeal to you. You can also text us on 0467 922 891. Now, rather cynically, I would suggest, my colleague David Bevan this morning, when I mooted that we were talking about this subject, suggested he would be more than open to being adopted by a billionaire. So is this possibly going to be manipulated for, say, inheritance purposes?
Look, quite possibly. We've already got a blog up on our Anderson's website about adult adoption and the effect on estate matters. So it's important that anyone who's considering being adopted or adopting someone, I guess adult or child, think through all of the ramifications of that, and estate issues is one of those. What we're finding is actually the inquiries we're getting are more often from step parents or step children, and that step family as a unit does want that person to be a biological child or a legal child, say, and to have those estate rights, in fact, because right now, under our Inheritance Family Provision Act, as a child of someone but not a biological child, if you're a stepchild, you cannot make a claim on the legal estate of someone.
Even if you've lived within that family for the bulk of your life.
That's right. And even if there's biological children who might be estranged from their parent, they can, in certain circumstances, make a claim on the estate, but you as the stepchild cannot. And for blended families where one parent might pass away before the others, there's issues about making mutual wills and those kind of things, and protecting your children in that step relationship where your partner might get the bulk of your estate. It certainly, presents some interesting ideas about that, and we think some inquiries are coming from that area, but in a good, legitimate, positive way.
Yeah. Nick says, I suppose you could adopt an 18-year-old if they need general support and show a potential for academic talent in university, etc. Sue's given us a ring from Normanville. Hi, Sue.
Hi. I'm really interested in this.
And why is that? What's your situation, Sue?
Okay, 20 years ago, we tried to adopt our foster daughter who just turned 18. We tried to adopt her before she was 18, but because she was under the guardianship of the minister, they wouldn't give us permission. She also had a disability. So we thought, well, that's okay. When she's 18, we'll adopt her then. So we went to adopt her when she turned 18, and we were told, no, we couldn't adopt her because you can't adopt an adult. So I'm really interested that we might be able to now adopt her. I mean,
do you still maintain a relationship with her, Sue?
Oh, absolutely,
yeah.
Yes. And we know that it's affected her because we have another adopted child. We know that it's affected her, that she's not the same because he's adopted and she's not, even though she changed her name and we've accepted her equally as our child, so have her, brothers and sisters. And we've made allowances for her in our will, and we've got all of that sorted, but I just think it would make a big difference to her if we could actually adopt her so that she just feels the same as the other adopted child in the family, and we have two biological children. But it would just make her feel that little bit different instead of being an ex-foster child.
Yeah, it's funny, Sue, isn't it? Because people say, "Oh, what's in a bit of paper?" But sometimes the bit of paper is something that people really find important.
It certainly does for her.
Yeah.
Because of her limited understanding, she just knows that she's different. She's not the same as the others.
So, Eva, in Sue's case, from what you've heard, and obviously you don't know all the detail, but from what you've heard, would this be a case that could be applied for by Sue in the youth court?
Yes, absolutely. Part of the review, the person who did the review, Dr. Lorna Hallahan, she identified that, in her view, it would be people who'd been in a foster-type relationship for an ongoing period of time who would really be interested in taking up this adoption as adults, and that was missing before these changes were made. So absolutely, there does need to be a pre-existing parent-type relationship before the person turns 18 in order for the conditions of the Act to be met, but it certainly sounds like Sue would be in that position.
Oh, before 18.
Yes.
Because I was going to say, what stops if it's adult adoptions, a 24-year-old adopting an 18-year-old, for instance.
Yes, quite right. So the Act talks about having a pre-existing parent relationship before the age of 18.
Another texter, Elizabeth at Tea Tree Gully, says, my father was a magistrate in the 70s and 80s and granted an adult adoption where the husband adopted the wife's children, so as a step family as well. What's your understanding of whether we've ever had adult adoptions in South Australia?
Yes, it's quite possible that occurred before the Adoption Act came into South Australia in 1988 and placed adoption in the youth court's jurisdiction. And as I understand it, when it did come in initially, there was, to a limited extent, adult adoption allowed by it, but the Act was repealed and changed shortly after that. And so from my understanding, since the late 1980s, when that Act has been in place and specifically said that adult adoption wasn't possible, I understand that since then to now it's not been possible.
Okay. So it was for a short period of time, but hasn't been for many decades in South Australia.
Yes.
Okay. So can people do this now? Is this change not just proposed, it's able to be done now?
It is. So the law changed last year and the regulations commenced in mid-December last year. And now that the regulations are there that actually enable the process, they can do it now.
And have you, at your firm, seen a lot of interest, or what sort of level of interest have you seen in these changes?
We have. We've got quite a few people reading our blogs on the Andersons website. We've had 80 views in total since November when the first blog went up. And 2 weeks ago, we put up the more recent blog talking about the fact that you can do it now. And we've had 36 views in that time and a number of inquiries. I've already got clients who are engaging us to undertake this for them.
Well, interesting. Look, Eva, thank you for explaining a bit about this. If this is something that is of interest to you, I imagine for many people this almost seems a little bit pointless, but as Sue has shown in her example, for some families this is something that is a really good development. So Eva, thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you, Sonya.